coming out and partaking in tonight's debate, rather, I guess we could say tonight's forum. Essentially, I want to just, first congratulate all of those who are running for a position. It just shows, the care that people have. And please know that we have tried our best to get this far, to go ahead and push Senate to be as much of a voice for the students as possible. And me as a graduating student and being with Senate for the past 4 years, I'm glad to say that we're leaving it in good hands, especially for next year. Even though these two candidates are running unopposed, they still need 50 plus 1% of the vote. So if 100 people run, 100 people vote, they need 50 people plus 1 to vote for them. If not, then we go for another election. But anyway, other than that, the way it's going to work out is going to be kind of a question and answer. I'd like to thank both Mr. Woolrick and Amanda Blasey for coming out tonight from the QCTV, right? QCTV?
No.
I'm sorry. Media Council, and from the QC for moderating our debate tonight. And so they'll go ahead and explain themselves, kind of the rules and the way it's going to go ahead and work out. And so I just want to welcome you all and thank you all for coming out. And best of luck to all the candidates that are running. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to the forum. We're going to start off asking questions made by myself and Amanda, and then we're also having questions made by students like you. And don't forget, you can actually tweet questions at ASWC_Senate, and you may be picked to have a question asked for the candidates. And after all those questions, we'll hopefully open it up to the public if they have any questions.
But we'd like to start off by having them introduce themselves and having a quick, their opening remarks.
Let's start with Vice President Rashid.
So, hello everyone. As you may know, my name is Vice President. I'm the Vice President of ASWC Senate. My name is Aaron Rashid. I've been on the table since I was a freshman. I served as freshman class president, and then my second year as campus relations director, and then this year as vice president. And through all of those different roles, I've had a plethora of really positive, challenging experiences which have allowed me to advocate for change on behalf of the student body. And I feel like those experiences have allowed me to grow enough that I would like to continue to do so, even more so, particularly because I've been able to have those experiences and gain that knowledge and gain that wisdom and create those relationships. And so that is why I'm currently running to be president of the ASWC.
Thank you. Senator Duenas.
Good evening, my name is Sofia Duenas, and I currently serve as the Academic Affairs Council Chair. I am the inaugural senator to hold that position. I also currently sit on 3 committees as a part of ASWC Senate. I sit on Administrative, Campus Relations, and the Academic Committee. And I absolutely love my role. I love Senate and all of the changes that Senate has seen, and that has inspired me to run for Vice President.
Thank you very much. Now let's start tonight talking about your competition, or lack thereof competition. So why do you think that there's no competition? And does the fact that there's no one running against you say something about Senate, that no one actually wants these positions, a very limited amount of people actually want these positions? Let's start with you, Senator.
So, as a candidate, I will openly say that it is a little bit disheartening that we don't have more individuals who are jumping up and down to run for Senate, because we would absolutely love to have more people represented and a diverse group of voices on the table. Why I think people have chosen not to run. One, we must recognize that you have to have had an experience on the table previously to run for an executive board position. In addition, I think that people recognize the time commitment and how challenging that can be, and that deters a lot of people from signing up for this. This is an incredibly serious role, and those of us who have chosen to pursue it really do believe in it. And so I think individuals recognize when they don't have that similar passion.
Thank you. Same question.
So, I don't think it's necessarily that students may look at Senate and say, well, that doesn't work, so I'm not going to bother. although I see why it could maybe be interpreted that way, but I think examples of earlier meetings that we had in the Senate, I think examples of the attendance that we had at the town hall show that students still utilize Senate as an outlet, even if it isn't, heightened in times of crisis, if you will. They still end up coming back to the table, and they still end up coming back and expressing their concerns. So I think it's less so that students feel that's not a mechanism that really works, and more so that it's a mechanism that does, as Senator Bernier says, require a lot of time, but also I think in this particular moment in our institution's history, which appears to be very turbulent and requires and mandates a lot of change, students have to say, okay, well, how much does the college need? And I think, we're all in agreement there's a lot that the college needs right now. And so students have to be willing to not only dedicate the time commitment, but also just the energy, understand the system, take the time to develop relationships with administrators. Not every student has the experiences or really the will to want to do that, and that's why there are elected positions. That's why there are elected positions.
We'll start with you this time. In your mind, what is the mission statement of Senate, and especially what is your role within that mission?
So my role currently, or my role?
As if you were to be our president, what would be your role in establishing that mission of Senate?
So for me, the mission statement is, we read it every single day, every single meeting. And it's posted in various places around the office. And there are some key words in there that kind of discuss how individuals who are elected on this table should represent the constituents. And the most important one to me, at least, is the idea of integrity. I believe that the mission statement of Senate means that the ASWC, not just Senate, but those committees that are under it, program board, the environmental committee, so on and so forth, the ASWC's job is to represent the student body's interests to the administration, but also to enhance the student experience as much as they are able to in the capacity of student leaders. And I think that when you're given, when people say, I voted for you, I trusted you for this leadership role, I believe that this is something that you can do for me and for our school, then that means, that in itself is an honor. It's a very humbling honor. And so, me personally, I believe that my role would really require me to facilitate as strongly as I can for the conversations as the head liaison to administration. It would be to set a really progressive agenda with priorities and programs that we would like to see and set in place, and trying to see those out, and whether that be with working with the different committees, with different senators and governing bodies, but also creating ad hoc committees if seen as necessary to address particular issues that this campus may have. And so, but the important thing is to look back at everything you're doing and every decision you decide to make in that context and say, am I really fulfilling the honor with integrity that was given to me or not, in order to reform.
So the ASWC Senate mission statement is ingrained in each one of us in a different way. So on the table currently, I represent academics, and so one of the pieces that continuously sticks with me is this idea of dynamic programming. And so as we continue to fund different initiatives and different groups come to us for support, that's something that I'm continuously thinking about, is how can we diversify and how can we enhance the student experience, whether that's through academic events, society-related events, whatever that might be. And so as I step into the role of vice president, were I to be elected, what the mission statement for me means, one, as prospective vice president, right, to keep in mind and continue the tradition of reading at every meeting and having, just in the way that it was taught to me, to continue to do that, but also to mentor the other senators who actually have a vote into identifying what the mission statement means to them. As we've heard, Vice President Rashid has an interpretation of what sticks with him. I have my own interpretation. And so ensuring that each senator understands what it means is really how I see my role changing moving forward.
Okay, we'll start this question for you. So, as you all know, many students take out a lot of loans and pay the big bucks to go to the school. And as a part of the tuition, or on top of the tuition, if you want to look at it, you pay $240 in student body fees every year. So I would like you guys to justify not only the importance, but almost the very existence of Senate when you consider that every single student on this campus could have $960 in their pocket right now instead of Senate, and especially for students that actually don't go to the events you fund, either because they have too far to commute, they don't have a desire to, or they don't want to, or anything.
So I think as we look at Senate funding, we have to recognize all of the initiatives that Senate supports, right? So the money you're talking about also goes towards Media Council, also goes towards Program Board. And it also goes to every organization that comes through these doors asking for funding and is funded. So while students may not attend our events, their lives are definitely touched by these funds. Even the recording today, right, that is with the support of these funds. Why is this absolutely necessary, and why is, without Senate funding, a lot of the programming that we have on this campus wouldn't happen. And especially when we talk about academics, one of the biggest pieces in this role is talking about student autonomy and the opportunities for students to take leadership positions and really make this campus what they'd like to see. And so without this money, there would be, I can't think of very many opportunities that there would be for students to have that autonomy and put on events that they'd actually like to attend.
Thank you. Vice President?
Yeah. So first to address just the simple fact that we're all struggling with debt, right? Like that is the defining characteristic of our generation, I think. And I've actually brought that up multiple times in the table. So at one point we were discussing BYOD, which is bring your own device, which is a policy the institution is thinking of going towards, which would require students for certain classes to have their own computer that they can bring to school, their own laptop. And the way that they said, well, some students wouldn't be able to get that. Their justification was, well, maybe we'll just ask the students to take out a small microloan through college. I am a student who pays for college completely on my own. I'm financially independent. I don't get help outside of financial aid and scholarships and the many hours that I work at the many jobs that I have, right? The last thing I need is a microloan to be able to take out a course. So that was one thing that we tried to argue against. BYOD is not going to be a policy on this campus anymore. But in regards to necessary costs, right? I think there are a lot of ways that we can look at the cost of the college, and that's something, tuition is something that I would like to look at and address if I were to become president. But in general, looking at just the student body fees, the necessity is the vast majority of organizations deeply rely on the student body fees to be able to host events. Additionally, all of our publications could not exist without the student body fees. So the printing of the QC, that comes out of your student body fees. The equipment for VPS, QCTV, that's your student body fees. The dances that are hosted. We heard a lot of positive feedback that we heard today in the constituent reports on Met Decent, which was a dance that recently happened. Couldn't have happened without the student body, or without the student body fees. They all rely heavily on that. And so if we're talking about enhancing the student experience, it's really hard to do that if students, this is the only money students really have complete say as to what happens to them. Why would we take that away from ourselves when we're already frustrated with how some of the other money is spent? So that's kind of why I think it's justified.
This is kind of related. At the beginning of the year, the student body was told that Senate's goal was to be more than just events. So more than just doing other important things besides just funding events. And do you feel this goal was achieved? And do you think that this is a goal you'd like to continue in the future? And so how would you accomplish it?
Definitely. So that was a goal that we had for actually since prior to President Whittier's administration, but even President Tori Esker. And each year we kind of incrementally have gotten better and better at that. The way we've done that is by using mechanisms that are already in place. So utilizing in-campus relations, for example. The live tweeting has started to really encourage dialogue from student body in terms of concerns to the Senate. We also, during our training periods with the senators, focus very heavily on how to best represent your constituents. So I actually would run the retreats as part of my role as vice president. And in that process, if you just look at the minutes from this year and the minutes from last year, our senators are talking more about actual issues on this campus than they ever really have. Not just last year, but years. And you can see that in the archives, right? Those are all readily available to you. I'm not saying you should all go and look at all the minutes and do some, you're more than welcome to, which is why they're there. But senators are starting to address these concerns more so than they ever have. And on top of all of that, I think just by the multitude of the meetings that have taken place, the town hall and its success in terms of attendance, showcase that we are here to listen. Students are coming to talk to us. We've had a 5.5 hour long meeting. That means we're doing more than just funding, because that was actually the smallest part of the meeting was the funding, right? And that's recurringly the theme. In a lot of our longest meetings, it's not because the funding went so long, but rather because we had very substantive conversation. So that's why I think we've achieved the goal. I do think there's always room for improvement there, and I do want to keep doing that. And the way I think that would best happen is, one, now that we've kind of established a culture where that is starting to normalize, try to increase that normalization. So in orientation, make sure that it's more apparent to first-year students what those mechanisms are. Meeting with governing bodies more regularly to establish what their mechanisms are. And I think as a great example is hosted by the Athenian Society of using their governing body to come to Senate and establish change on the dialogue on the issue of accessibility. I would want more organizations to understand how they can do that kind of grassroots work to help us be better liaisons to the administration.
So I think as a Senate, we have done a tremendous amount of work in making ourselves available and approachable. We have gone through extensive training. As soon as we come in as a senator, I came in October, I believe, after the Senate retreat for the vast majority of senators had happened. And that was one of the things that was stressed to me, was how I would represent my constituents and what that would look like. So when we consider the table and where we're at now, we have definitely gotten, much better. And we have made our various components of Senate stronger as well. So our committees have gotten significantly stronger. I firmly believe that they're at an unprecedented spot in terms of we have students who are not part of Senate sitting on committees, we have senators sitting on committees, all of that, right? And those have very little to do with funding and more so motions and bills that the ASWC Senate works with. In addition, I think the length of our meetings says so much. We are here across the board, senators. Our constituent reports are incredibly long, incredibly detailed, because we really make it a point. While we do have a vote on the table, we do so much more than that in terms of facilitating and creating relationships with administrators, faculty, and staff to see the change that students would like to see.
Thank you. Let's take a quick hop on over to Twitter and see what's being said there.
This question was submitted for Amber, but I think that either of you could also address it. The question asks, is the president position a liaison for students to administration or for administration to students? And which relationship would be the forefront of your platform in your time as president? Is that what you're
Yes, it does. So the relationship is clearly the former. The students are who elected me, the students are my constituents, and the students are who I represent. And I communicate said concerns to administration, but not just communicate them, but really advocate for the needs and rights of students in the process. And that's what I've been doing, I believe, especially when you look at the dialogue that has happened with the various changes. We keep using accessibility as one, because that was a really big one at the beginning of the semester, but that wasn't the only one. We saw changes in when we passed the bill for Indigenous Peoples Day. We saw these different, just consistently different and wider conversations that are happening about just the interdepartmental concerns that we had, their own communication, and then the administration decided to change their communication system. We had conversations about safety, and now we're getting updates about kind of safety training. And that doesn't happen by administration to student, it happens by student to administration, and to continue.
Do you have anything to add to that, Tony?
I think, again, as Vice President Rashid stated, we absolutely represent the students first and foremost. And while one of the strengths of being put into this position is that we do have contacts within the administration and within the faculty who trust us and rely on us to be the voice of the students. First and foremost, we spend most of our time listening to other students and finding ways to use their feedback and ensuring that we can find a way to keep administrators accountable and do something with it.
Let's do another funding question. So, I know some of the senators are quite hardliners when it comes to the funding code, and other people are not quite so, I would say. How do you think the funding code should be approached moving forward? Because it almost seems sometimes that it's almost on a case-by-case basis, and is that really fair or equitable? Let's start with you, Sylvia.
So I believe that the funding code is incredibly important. And I personally, as a senator, when I'm looking at events, there's three things, or any funding request, there are three things I keep in mind. One, is the event going to be successful? So is the event feasible? Does the organization have just the skill to put on this event, right? Because despite the funding code, despite the constituents I represent, if the organization cannot put on the event and it's not feasible, it won't happen, despite what the Senate would like. So that's the first consideration. Then the second is the funding code, because being equitable and ensuring that students understand why senators made certain decisions is incredibly important. And so our consistency is something that is brought up on almost every meeting, I would say. We referred to a funding request in the past to figure out what was done with that. And so I think that's something we need to continue, is holding ourselves accountable to ensure that we're representing the funding code. I personally believe that it's there for a reason, and if we feel that the funding code needs to be amended, we can do that, and we have the mechanisms to do so. However, I recognize that there are exceptions. And if within representing our constituents, we believe that senators believe that there's an exception that needs to be made, then they will do that. As long as the key is being aware of the funding code and aware of why they've decided to bring it.
Vice President Rashid.
So it has been done by case basis, and I actually, to a certain extent, would want it to continue so. So I would say, I firmly believe that the funding policy should be utilized as a guideline. I think that's your starting place. And then based off of the event's history, based off of the organization, and when I say based off of the organization, understand that the measurement of that is the organization's ability in the past to create successful events, and the organization's consistency with following the governing body rules, with making sure that they're going about things appropriately, because even institutionally, we all know that to set up an event, there's a lot of red tape to have to go through to make sure that that event is successful. And so certain organizations have not come forward and utilized the tools in their governing bodies to be able to do so, and be led to do so, and taught to do so. And so those that have, obviously, then are going to deserve funding because their event is going to increase the student experience, whereas an organization which is requesting a lot of money but has repeatedly had not successful events, for example, and only 5 students are going to attend, maybe it isn't equitable to the student experience to have dollars go to an unsuccessful event if you could have it go to a very successful event. So that's kind of the way I believe it should be looked at, because that's the way I believe the money can be most efficiently used.
We have another question coming from Twitter.
So, this question is actually sent in by our current president, Mr. Robert Whittier, who asks, a relationship of that of a president and vice president is one that needs to work well with one another. How is your working relationship?
Let's start with Vice President Rashid for this one.
So they should be able to answer each other's sentences. That's the
That's the
question.
ultimate test.
Maybe by the end of the year, although Robert and I still can't do that. I don't know if I'd want to. So yeah, you have to work well together. And so it's really funny because Robert and I butt heads a lot. We do. But at the end of the day, when certain things need to happen, we know we can sit down, have a conversation, weigh things out, and essentially, if we're on opposing sides, whoever has the most compelling argument, and as an adult, we make that decision and move on from there. With Senator Duenas, I wouldn't be different. We're different people. We have different opinions. We have different viewpoints. We have different perspectives. The thing is, though, in order to work well with someone and be willing to engage dialogue with them, you have to respect them. And I do wholeheartedly respect Senator Duenas. And I do that because when I wrote the Academic Affairs Council into existence with the bill my sophomore year, I wasn't going to have the chair of that council be somebody that I didn't think would be able to successfully carry that out. Because that was my child. I created this entire mechanism, and I wrote this bill, and I said, I really want students to have a way to be able to communicate academic concerns. But I knew that in my position, I wouldn't be able to be in charge of it. I needed someone else to kind of take hold. And so in the fall, we had applications, and Senator Duenas applied, and you know, she was my top choice, and she accepted and was appointed and was accepted by the Senate. And since then has helped construct that mechanism. And so I trusted her with that project. I certainly can trust her to be my left-hand woman, or right-hand, she'll be on my left, but you get the phrase. So I think it'll be a really positive team, because I think our work ethic together is respectable and respect each other at work ethic.
I think ultimately, in addition to respect, I think one of our strengths is that we trust each other and we understand where the other comes from. In creating a brand new governing body, there are a multitude of decisions to make. I had never sat on the table before, and quite literally, this was Vice President Rashid's baby. And so throughout the school year, we have worked collaboratively to make departmental student councils what they should be, and in doing that, create mechanisms so that they can continue to grow. And so I think our communication, our trust and respect for each other the perfect example is the Academic Affairs Council and how successful we have been in working collaboratively. And so that will continue were we to both take on these roles.
Recently, data was compiled by Andrew Tejada, which shows that overall students are dissatisfied with the excessive amount of dances as well as generally low quality. Will this encourage you to make any changes in whether you encourage or discourages fundings coming forward for dances, or will there not be much of a change?
Would you like me to start?
Sure.
So, first and foremost, I think what's going to happen is I would want that data to be overlooked amongst with other surveys that have been kind of sent out this year during the fall retreat when we discuss things at the table, kind of like the table, and on how to do Senate stuff, and kind of have a table perspective and have that conversation. I think that the excessive amount of dances is that way, it's excessive. And so this year we actually cut back significantly on the number of dances that are offered traditionally compared to other years. And that's been, we've had positive feedback on the dances that we have funded thus far. So particularly, we just heard a lot about Met Decent, which just happened. But if you look at other minutes, other references, a lot of the dances do end up getting positive feedback. And one thing that we always look at when funding dances is how successful they were the year prior. So if even the dances that we have now continues to feel like it's excessive or something of that nature, and some of those dances are not being successful, then that constitutes for that. But recent trends are showing that a lot of the organizations kind of stopped throwing the dances that they did. There are far fewer of them. Those fewer dances have come in much more prepared with much more of a concept and a plan for each of these events. And so those concepts and plans have ended up becoming much more fruitful. So I'm curious to see, based off of the experience of last year, where students answered, based off the experience of last year and kind of the experiences of this year, how those compare. But I do think that we kind of need to keep the status quo that was established this year of the lesser number of dances that are already successful and kind of try and maintain the successful events and see what to do with the other money to make more successful events.
So I sincerely appreciate Andrew Tejada's effort in creating this survey and giving it to students. And so I think when we look at it, it's incredibly valuable data, but just as with any other research, we also have to recognize what percentage of the student population answered the survey, how representative it is of the student body, and all of that. And so in conversation with the table, I think that's something we all have to be cognizant of. That being said, if you, even within his own presentation, if you've seen it, as all of the senators have, as ISC will this coming week, the amount of funding, the number of dances, the number of societies collaborating on dances has changed dramatically, even from his freshman year 3 years ago, 4 years ago. We are as a table, we are much more critical. We are asking organizations to be much more innovative and make their dances really dynamic. We have seen dances completely change student experience. And I think in part, one of the things we have seen cited in funding requests is his data, right? When Psychedelic Circus came for funding, they brought to us some of the findings from that survey and said, this is why we have decided to include certain components. And so I think encouraging organizations to continue to do so and supporting those initiatives as a table is incredibly important. That being said, dances are some of the most highly attended events that the Senate funds, and so we have to ensure that we are representing our constituents in the events that they attend and enjoy.
Let's hop on over to Twitter.
A Twitter person asks, to both candidates, is there society bias given that you both are part of them? How will you attempt to prevent that bias?
Let's start with Senator Jones.
Okay, so yes, I'm in a society. I'm a member of the Ionian Society. I just pledged this past year. That being said, serving on the table, I represented academics, and most people would usually identify societies and academics in conflict with each other for funding, and I believe I've served in my role in a professional and as unbiased as I could possibly make it. That being said, we also, as executive board members, do not have a vote. So were we to have a vote, we would abstain from votes having to do with our societies, but we will not have a vote next year. In addition, I think societies are just one organization that I'm a part of, right? I represent a multitude of interests across campus, and just as I'm able to separate those from my role here in Senate, I'll be able to separate my society from my role here in Senate as well.
Vice President Rashid.
Yeah. So this question I think comes up not just like every debate that ever has taken place, but really any type of forum or really anything. It always kind of resurfaces. It's always a point that needs to be made, and I find it really interesting and intriguing. Because, yeah, I'm in a society that's no secret, I've never hid it. I've been in society since my first year here on campus. I've pledged to be a WAVE, and that's an identity that I hold proud on this campus. But why I find it intriguing that there's always the concern of a bias is because I am also, I also served 3 different positions on this table, and those are part of my identity. I also served as an RA twice in first year dorms, and that's part of my identity. I'm a double major and served on the student councils and those majors every year since I've been here. That's part of my identity. I'm a tour guide. I'm a student tech liaison. And the list keeps growing. And so those are all part of my identities here on campus as well. And so does it also mean that, me being a first year RA, is that going to affect me and a bias towards first years? Does it mean, right, like you can have cross-cut these biases any which way you'd like. Everyone has a bias, and that's not just in the organizations that they are here. In the real world, your everything, your identity is your bias. And what you look for in a leader is someone that you believe you can trust to not utilize that bias or not have that bias affect their decisions, or at least be cognizant of the bias when trying to make decisions so that they can try to curtail the bias when they have to make those decisions. And I believe that we've showcased that we can do that, and we have done that. And so that's with anything in bias. When you're reading a textbook, you're critically engaging with a textbook, you're looking at it and the biases it has. And if I can do that with a textbook, I can do that with my own decisions. And I have done that with my own decisions, and that's been the status quo that I've set for myself, and the precedents that I've set with myself, and that we've regularly encouraged on the table. So it's funny that it's always a concern, because I feel like we vocalize publicly as much as we can that student leaders are student leaders regardless of what leadership roles they have and what organizations and what type of organizations. I'm the founder and president of SJP. Does that mean that, it's just all these different concerns. And so I think it's just important to realize that everyone has inherent biases regardless, but the question is whether or not, are they going to show favoritism? The question is whether or not are they going to make bad decisions and not be trustworthy because of those biases. And no, I don't think we will, and I don't think we've shown reason to believe that.
So this year we've had a lot of, I guess I could say, exciting events. And now that we've had some time to digest what's happened and also have some hindsight, how effective do you think the public forums and the town hall we had were? And what do you think could be done to make them more effective? Or do you have an alternative, possibly, that you would suggest?
Yeah. It was a very difficult year for our campus, particularly this last semester. That Senate meeting lasted 5.5 hours, but the students were that frustrated and had that much to say. That town hall followed it because students had more to say. Whether or not I believe that, or Whether I think they were effective, yes, to a degree. I think there's more that can be done. I don't think they were perfect. I think there were a lot of flaws in them, actually. But I do think that it made a very valuable and important point, or cemented a foundation for us, and that is the point that we, the student body, or we, the associated students of Whittier College, rather, firmly believe that our needs and our rights need to be addressed, and we are going to make noise, and we are going to force discussions, and we're going to seek out those needs and those rights if they are not given to us. And what we've also seen on the flip side is administration has said, well, we didn't realize these were issues, or we didn't see this, or so on and so forth. And so in that discourse, where we've made our position very clear, they've made certain changes or have agreed to begin looking into making certain changes, right? And so that's why that was successful. I think in the future, though, the structure of the forum needs to be changed. I don't think it can start the same way that it did this year. I don't think that was, I mean, it was clear that it didn't work because it changed halfway through the forum. I don't think that that having maybe every single senior staff member there for each one might necessarily be the most effective. So I think maybe having like a bi-semester one, and each semester focus on a different area and have that senior staff person and their supporting staff could be maybe more efficient. So those are different things I would look at, but I think that the idea and the mechanism should still remain.
Senator?
I think that the town halls and public voice as a tool to listen to our constituents was incredibly successful this semester. I think part of the reason the town hall and that session of public voice was so successful is because it was what the students wanted at that time, right? They wanted their senators to listen to them. This is the format they wanted it in. They were very clear. The event changed halfway as administrators and senators worked together to ensure that we were being responsive to students' needs. And so I think it was successful in that regard, and to ensure success in the future, we have student feedback committee. And we need more students to serve on it. We, as senators, can only predict so much. And so encouraging students to join student feedback committee and then letting them take the helm in planning and organizing and figuring out what senior staff should be there is really what we'd like to see. And so as much as I believe that we can play an active role in that, our jobs are also to encourage members of the public to play an active role, because we are here to support and listen to you guys as long as we have that feedback. And so in that, we have student feedback as a mechanism to do that.
Let's have 2 more questions, and then we'll move it to you guys to have questions.
With everything that's been happening, there's the town halls and everything like that. And great steps were made between you guys and administration and stuff like that. But some students still feel a crisis of confidence in Senate's ability to incite real change. Do you believe this exists? And even if not, how would you work to address this perception?
Yeah, so I think that's something incredibly challenging, and I think that one of the things we've learned as a table is when students come in and watch what we do and get a better sense of who we are as student leaders, they realize that we're actually making a lot of moves, and we actually are doing a ton to try to be as responsive as we can. And so a part of this perception that Senate it can't do anything or isn't being responsive is getting students to learn more about our organization and how we conduct ourselves, what we do. In that, it's also recognizing I will not be the first, I will not be the last to say that Senate does have a limited capacity. Does that mean that we cannot bring to light changes? Does that mean that students shouldn't come to us? Absolutely not, because we are an organized mechanism for the students. And if something is of great concern, we can continue to voice it, and there are a multitude of things that we can do. So as we consider whether Senate or not is successful, I think it's successful to the extent that our student body helps us be successful, right? So if we continue to get support, and these are our concerns, and this is what we'd like to see done, we can continue to voice that, and we can continue to be as constructive and reflective as possible. But I think what we need to work on is figuring out how to communicate to students what we're doing and the moves that are being made that may not be as obvious as they would like.
So every organization, every institution is going to have some people that don't trust the mechanism itself or don't trust that it works. You have people that don't vote because they don't think it matters, right? Because they believe that electoral college is flawed. You have people that don't participate in certain organizational events because they think it doesn't make a difference. You don't volunteer because they're like, well, you know, poverty is everywhere, it's not going to make a difference, right? Like, these are attitudes that you see regularly. It makes sense. There always needs to be critiques. There's always needs to be someone who doubts the system in order for the system to check itself. That's how checks and balances work. But I think it's important to realize that the Associated Students of Whittier College is an organization which is trying to consistently have greater professionalization, to have greater representation of its constituents to the administration. And the administration, for the most part, are older PhDs who are running institutions, who studied the running of institutions, and who have certain ideas in mind. And so to have them hear us out, we have to, use this formal mechanism and do so in a respectful, professional manner, and have conversations that might be very difficult and very challenging, but know how to maneuver that. Because otherwise, they're not going to hear it out. And so Senate is the best possible way that can happen, and the only way that really has been cemented with any type of respect by both faculty, staff, and administration. Additionally, I think it's important to note that the ideas of how Senate can work best is based off of, do people doubt that the student body itself can't do anything to change the institution? Because Senate is a representation of the student body. That's the ideal. And so if the student body regularly says and voices concerns, and Senate isn't able to channel those along and push for changes, then the student body and Senate are successful. They work hand in hand. They're not detached from each other. At least they shouldn't be. And if that perception exists, then it's up to the senators to be closer to their constituents. It's up to individuals to try and reach out more to their constituents and to showcase the things that are being done to change. So that the perception doesn't exist, so that the students feel like they can voice their concerns, so that the changes can happen.
So, as you know, we've had many complaints involving mandatory meal plans, lack of parking, campus safety, ADA compliance, tuition hikes, etc., etc., etc. Now, I know that Senate has addressed and has discussed almost all of these issues, but there are still many, many students that aren't aware of anything that you've done on any of these issues. And they don't even know, a lot of times, where to voice their concerns. A lot of students don't even know when Senate meetings are, or that there is public voice. So, I'm wondering, what do you think can be done better to communicate with the student body and market yourselves as a student body?
You asked that question every year too. And we've developed on it. When I first took the campus relations director position my sophomore year, nothing had actually happened with the position prior. So my freshman year, the position came to the meeting and left the meeting. And that was kind of their position description. And I took it and I began the live tweeting, and I began instituting the ASWC addresses. I began instituting all these different things which would increase communication, essentially, was the goal. Director Whittier this year has surpassed that and has grown upon that. Unfortunately, these huge changes of everyone not knowing something exists, which was what the case was my first year, to everyone knowing it does exist. It can't happen overnight, but we've made some huge incremental leaps, I think, and have gotten our name out there more with the QC's help, even with Senator Brees, for example. I think it would be up to the next director of campus relations to continue to increase that communication, find more mechanisms which it'll work in. And of course, it would be the job of myself as the head of that executive cabinet to ensure A, that it's getting done, B, that it has some quality to it, and C, that it's actually effective and efficient. And so that's going to be our goals. But to give you like a concrete, these are the ways we're going to increase communication, it's difficult, only because it's important to take a look back at the end of the year and understand which forms of communication worked and which ones didn't. And that happens with end of the year reports, and that happens with the understanding and the review of everything that's kind of occurred over the term.
So I think in this regard, and partially because I just had an experience with this, so earlier today, for those of you who are unaware, we were tabling as a Senate outside of the CI, and we asked our constituents to fill out a survey. And two of the questions on that, most of the questions have to do with Senate and how responsive we've been and so on and so forth, but two of the questions especially address how well our constituents know how to contact us. So one of the questions asks, do you know how to contact a senator? Like one, I have no idea, 5 being very true, and then later on we ask, what is your favorite way what is the best way to contact your senator in your opinion? And verbally, and we haven't seen the results for that, we'll be tabling tomorrow as well, but verbally, students were overwhelmingly saying, I talk to my senator face to face. And that's an incredibly important piece of information for us to know, and so in figuring out how we're going to communicate effectively with the members of the public, I think we need to ask our student body what they'd like, right? A lot of them absolutely love the live tweeting, and it's really ensuring that the campus relations director has all of the tools that they need to make what the student body would like possible. The survey that I'm referring to is the work of our current campus relations director, and so as an executive board, ensuring that we support that person and empower that person as much as possible is really what it comes down to. We as individuals have a limited capacity in figuring out what these mechanisms should look like. We have a lot in place, and we welcome the student body and want to continue finding ways to get the student body's feedback on these mechanisms.
So now we will turn the spotlight over to all of you. You are now free to ask questions, whatever they may be. Go ahead.
So as president, what's one of the main goals you want to accomplish for next year?
Yeah. So for me, one of the things I definitely would like to institute is to create an ad hoc committee, which essentially its job would be to review the recent budget that was released, I think by the QC, if I'm not mistaken, and look over that and have meetings with the Vice President of Finance, Jim Dunkelman, and kind of begin pulling apart so that there's a student nuance and a student report of understanding of where tuition money goes, and kind of understanding in what ways and to what extent is that reasonable. And so that committee's job would be to investigate that and advocate for students' rights on that behalf. But while that's kind of happening, I would also very much like to ensure that there is a more formalized channel where, right now we have the executive cabinet meeting regularly with Board of Trustees when they come to campus to meet. And we're meeting with their Board of Trustee committees and things of that nature to discuss certain concerns. And when we pass bills, it gets sent to the Board of Trustees that are relevant to that conversation and so on and so forth. I think there's a huge disconnect between the Board of Trustees and the student body. My goal is to increase that because I think the Board of Trustees can only hear so much from the same faces of the individuals that are on the cabinet all year. But when they hear a voice, 1,700 voices, they're more likely to respond. And so it takes so much during Senate, so many things have to build up for us to show as evidence before certain people take us seriously on certain topics. But having a deeper and closer and more connected relationship between the board and the student body can kind of help surpass that and make representative work easier to the board. So that way when we have concerns with administration, faculty, or staff, they're not the only channels we can go through. There's someone that oversees them as well. And at the end of the day, if they're kind of the overseers of the institution and we're the clients of the institution, then we're who they need to be listening to. And so I want to make sure that they actually are.
So I think in a similar vein, one of my one of the things I'm most interested in is strengthening committees overall. So committees are a mechanism that Senate uses in a variety of ways, but they dictate what we do. They are created ad hoc when we feel like a committee is necessary. And in many ways, towards the end of this semester and this year, we've realized that committees are not as strong as they could be. We've realized that very few members of the public are aware of committees, serve on committees. Senators are not facing the same amount of accountability that they are in other respects of their roles. And so one of my personal goals is to ensure that committees, in the same way that Senate has been professionalized, they go through that same period of growth. And they're respected in the same way that our Monday night meetings are. And so whether that means telling the student body and ensuring students know when committees meet, whether that means we need to put some funding towards something that our committees feel like would enhance their ability to be responsive, whether we need to utilize org sync more, whatever that looks like, we need to figure that out and take the necessary actions, and that's something that I would love to do.
Any more questions from the audience?
As somebody who's interested in the environment and the environmental concerns on campus, such as water usage and then also the disposal of waste products in places like the CI, what do you both see Senate's role in sort of the school in addressing environmental issues, environmental concerns, and like what specifically would you perhaps do to bring these issues more to the forefront? Or is that even a priority at all for either of you?
Want me to go first?
Whoever wants to jump in, go.
So, I actually was fortunate enough to be one of the authors on the SEFA bill, which was the Smaller Environmental Footprint Act. And so it clearly is a priority to answer that part of the question. I think that SEFA only did so much. My dreams for SEFA were much bigger than what they were, and then we saw institutional limitations in blocking. My goal would be to work with Representative McMurray to kind of enhance and increase SEFA and make those efforts bigger. Increase the number, decrease the amount of water we're using, looking at those different challenges, and ensuring that like our food waste is being composted maybe, or that students are being held aware, educated of how much they're wasting. Our energy waste is being looked at. Our water waste is being looked at. And for our campus, we have a surprisingly large amount of waste water. Like we waste a lot of water just on our sidewalks, right? Like all the time. And so kind of ensuring that that stops and kind of saying, you know what, enough is enough, is kind of where I would go, but I'd work closely with the environmental representative on that.
I think the same goes for me. I think that we have seen a tremendous change in the creation of that position, whether it be Representative McMurray or another representative who serves in that position, working with that individual to ensure that they have the autonomy as well as their committee has the power to bring to the table different issues that they're seeing and ensure that we as a table are being as cognizant and responsive to those needs as possible. We have seen some tremendous changes, and I think we will continue to see changes, and we need to be strategic in the types of campaigns and the types of movements that that representative leads, whether it's that we encourage students to call facilities themselves when they see a sprinkler is broken, and ensure that students, just like we have campus safety, have facilities phone number or whoever would be tasked with fixing that, right? There are different things that we need to support that representative in doing, and so really we are relying on whoever is in that position to help inform us on how we can do that.
Any more questions from the audience? Well, if there's none, thank you all for coming to the debate. Thank you, contestants. I hope you trounce the competition tomorrow. And thank everyone for coming.